Imagine standing face to face with the most powerful man alive, a conqueror whose armies had marched across continents, a king who could offer you wealth beyond imagination. And when he asked, "What is your greatest wish?" you look him in the eyes and replied, "Move. You're blocking my sunlight." No fear, no hesitation, no desire for gold, power, or fame. Just sunlight. The man who gave that answer wasn't a king. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't even what most people would call successful. He owned almost nothing. He slept in a large clay jar that people later described as a barrel. He walked barefoot through the streets. He begged for food when he needed it. And yet, many believed he was freer than the emperor standing before him. His name was Diogenes of Sinope. More than 2,000 years later, his life still asks a question that feels deeply uncomfortable. What if the things we spend our lives chasing are the very things keeping us from being free? To understand that question, we have to return to ancient Greece. Diogenes wasn't born into poverty. His father worked with money, and for a time, his future appeared ordinary. But something happened. Historical accounts differ on the details, yet they agree on the outcome. Diogenes lost everything. Whether through exile, scandal, or political conflict, he was forced to leave his hometown and begin again with almost nothing. For most people, losing everything would have been a tragedy. For Diogenes, it became a revelation. He began asking a question that very few people dare to ask. If losing my possessions hurts this much, who truly owns whom? Do I own my belongings? Or do they own me? The more he observed society, the more convinced he became that people were trapped, not by chains, but by desires. They worked endlessly for larger homes. They competed for status. They worried about appearances. They feared losing what they had spent years accumulating. And in trying to secure comfort, they quietly surrendered their freedom. Diogenes chose a completely different path. He believed that happiness didn't come from acquiring more. It came from needing less. This philosophy became the foundation of a movement known as Cynicism. Today, the word cynical often describes someone who expects the worst from people. But the original cynics were something entirely different. They believed that nature already provided everything necessary for a good life. Everything beyond that was often an unnecessary burden. So Diogenes began stripping away almost every comfort. He wore simple clothes, on only a few basic items, slept wherever he could, and eventually settled inside a massive clay storage vessel that became legendary throughout history. To many people, it looked like madness. To Diogenes, it looked like freedom. Every object he gave away removed one more thing he had to protect. Every comfort he abandoned removed one more fear from his life. He wasn't trying to punish himself. He was performing an experiment. How much can a human being remove before discovering what truly matters? It sounds extreme, and perhaps it was. But even today, psychologists continue asking similar questions. Why does acquiring more rarely make us happier for long? Why do promotions, expensive cars, and larger homes create excitement that fades so quickly? Researchers call this the hedonic treadmill our minds rapidly adapt to improved circumstances. What once felt extraordinary soon becomes normal. Then we begin chasing the next thing, and the next, and the next. Diogenes noticed this pattern over 2,000 years before modern psychology gave it a name. He simply refused to step onto the treadmill in the first place. While others spent their lives climbing higher, he stepped off the ladder entirely. And that decision would soon make him one of the most controversial men in all of Greece. Most philosophers taught inside schools. They debated ideas. They wrote books. They attracted students. Diogenes preferred something far more dangerous. He turned his entire life into a lesson. Every action was a challenge to society. Every conversation became a mirror. Every insult forced people to question themselves. He didn't merely criticize the world. He exposed it. One of his most famous habits became legendary. In broad daylight, under the bright Mediterranean sun, Diogenes would walk through crowded streets carrying a lit lantern. People laughed. Some mocked him. Others simply stared. Eventually someone asked, "What are you doing?" Diogenes calmly replied, "I'm looking for an honest man." Imagine hearing those words, not in an empty city, but surrounded by hundreds of people. His answer wasn't just a joke. It was an accusation. He believed that most people weren't living honestly. They lied to impress strangers, pretended to be happier than they were, chased success because everyone else was chasing it. They performed versions of themselves that the world wanted to see. In many ways, that criticism feels strangely modern. Today we curate our lives through screens. We compare ourselves with carefully edited versions of other people's reality. We measure our worth with followers, salaries, possessions, and achievements. The stage has changed. The performance hasn't. Diogenes challenged another illusion: status. Ancient Greece admired wealth, influence, reputation, and intellectual prestige. Diogenes admired none of them. When wealthy citizens displayed expensive clothing, he laughed. When politicians gave grand speeches, he questioned whether they actually lived by their own words. When respected philosophers debated virtue for hours, Diogenes wondered why so few of them practiced it. That made him deeply unpopular. People often say they value honesty until someone becomes brutally honest, because genuine honesty threatens comfortable illusions. Diogenes understood something about human nature that still holds true today. We rarely become angry at ideas. We become angry when those ideas expose our own contradictions. His lifestyle constantly asked uncomfortable questions. If happiness depends on luxury, why do so many wealthy people remain anxious? If success guarantees fulfillment, why does achievement so often create new fears instead of peace? If freedom comes from owning more, why do people with the most possessions often have the most to lose? He never claimed that everyone should live inside a clay jar. That wasn't the point. The jar was a symbol. It represented independence from a society that measured human value by external success. And perhaps that explains why people remembered him for centuries. Not because he rejected comfort, but because he rejected the belief that comfort alone could ever satisfy the human soul. Soon, his reputation spread far beyond Athens. Stories about the strange philosopher reached kings, generals, and eventually, the greatest conqueror the ancient world had ever known. Alexander the Great had conquered nations. His armies stretched across continents. His name inspired both admiration and fear. Yet standing before Diogenes, he encountered something he had never defeated: a man with nothing to lose. When Alexander offered him anything he desired, Diogenes answered with the words that would echo through history: "Move. You're blocking my sunlight." It wasn't an insult. It was a declaration. A man who needs nothing cannot be controlled. Power only exists over those who fear losing something. Money can be taken. Status can disappear. Beauty fades. Even our bodies grow weaker with time. But a free mind is far more difficult to conquer. Perhaps that's why, according to tradition, Alexander later said, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Whether those were his exact words matters less than the truth they reveal. One man conquered the world. The other conquered himself. Today, we live in a society that constantly tells us we need more. More success. More followers. More money. More possessions. More recognition. But Diogenes spent his entire life asking a different question. How much of what you're chasing do you actually need? And how much is simply keeping you from noticing the sunlight already shining on your face? Maybe happiness isn't found by adding more to your life. Maybe it's found by discovering what can finally be left behind. Because in the end, the richest person isn't the one who owns the most. It's the one who needs the least.